Hey, this is Cristian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis. This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Ray Gibbs through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going to
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
That Porter says cheated.
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another edition of Nos Odietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines, Watson's Counter, and our subscribers. This is episode 438, and we're recording on Thursday, October 5th, 2023. I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is Mark Kastner and our engineer, Lickett. Aaron is, I don't know, watching wrestling or something. Well, the Sounders are officially back in the playoffs. As it turned out, that was going to happen regardless of the outcome of Wednesday's game against the Galaxy, but thanks to some very late heroics from Cristian Roldan, they got to celebrate in style. Roldan's 96-minute goal was actually the latest game winner in Lumen Field history, 1 whole second later than Kelvin Leardham's winner against Vancouver in 2019. The win also pushes the Sounders' unbeaten streak to 7 games, puts them back into second place in the Western Conference, and makes me wonder, was Oliver teeth gnashing misplaced, Mark?
Yes and no. I think it's just one of those moments where you just kind of go scoreboard and you end up looking at previous seasons where you thought, hey, the Sounders have played really well. And I thought the Sounders played super well in 2019. They didn't qualify for the playoffs until the last game and Raul Diaz's stoppage time. So it's kind of like one of those moments where it's like, maybe we're not like incredibly pleased with the Sounders' performance overall this season, but it's all relative because turns out the rest of the West is a lot worse than where the Sounders are at. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the Sounders would be like tied for 6th in the Eastern Conference right now, which is actually better than it had been recently. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, I tweeted this out the other today, and there was this graph that we have access to through I don't need to get into it. There's this graph out there that shows where the Sounders have finished each week in the standings, and all season they haven't been below 4th. And I think there was a sense in the fan base that things were a lot worse than that. Like there was, like, I felt like the lows in terms of like the morale and the vibes around the fan base were as bad as they've been at any point. And this was, this includes 2016 when they were like second from worst in the whole league at one point. And I think, and I don't know, maybe that's, I'm sure to some degree that's misremembering how bad it really felt at that time. But the point is that it felt pretty bad. And I think that's a lot of it is because of how last season went, which they obviously missed the playoffs for the first time. And so this was sort of seen as a continuation. And, the way the season started, where they were 5-1-1, and it felt like, oh, they're going to contend for the Supporter Shield. And it's been obvious for months now that they weren't going to contend for the Supporter Shield. So just to be fighting for a playoff spot felt sort of like a loss, almost like, like fighting for a playoff spot was almost as bad as literally missing the playoffs.
Yeah. And I think the start of the season was great. They played so well.
Mhm.
And, you know, they had struggles for 2 or 3 months, depending on how you want to.
5 months, if you want to
Yeah.
get into it. They've been kind of struggling for 5 months. I guess it depends on how you consider the last month, but yeah.
And it's also just like, and honestly, in like a lot of key moments, they just haven't showed up, like against Portland, you know,
Right.
and particularly that home game where Portland has just fired their head coach. You know, the coach Gio Savarese has had Brian Spencer's number his
Mhm.
entire like
Mhm.
career, and then they go 2 up, and it's just so like emotionally charged, and it feels like here's the moment, and then they just completely, wet their bed sheets or whatever. And I was doing some reflecting when we were talking about like recording this, and it was like I'm really struggling to find moments in Sounders history where I felt worse about the team than after that Portland draw.
Yeah.
Partly because of it's like the way that it happened, but also just like the overall vibes of like where they were at in that moment were terrible. Like
Well,
and looking back, yes, they were probably always going to qualify for the playoffs if they kind of kept that. But they also did such a good job of like clearing that hurdle, stumbling in the Leagues Cup, stumbling again when they got out of the Leagues Cup, and now they're 7 unbeaten. And who knows what this team can do?
yeah. Well, I think part of it was they were coming off that big win against Austin coming into the Timbers game, and it felt like all of a sudden we've been waiting sort of for this turnaround to happen. You go back to the Vancouver game where they came back and won, or they didn't come back and win, but they were, I guess they never trailed that game, but they won that game 3-2, and they won it on a stoppage time winner. And it felt like that was a point where it's clicking, it's going to turn around, and they're going to sprint to the end, and it's going to be gravy, and it's going to be fun. And it didn't. Instead, it went the exact opposite direction. They struggled, and it steamrolled. It sort of like picked up in Leagues Cup, just sort of like made everything feel worse. And then they come out of Leagues Cup, and they had that complete face plant against Atlanta. And at that point, it almost felt like the season was maybe going to completely unravel. And instead, they kind of pull themselves back together. They get a couple results. They go into the Timbers game. They go up 2-0, and then the rug gets pulled out again, and they have to settle for a draw on that one. And I think last week we talked about this a little bit, but last week the Nashville tie, even though it was a tie, it felt like for the first time they really controlled a match. They didn't get the result that they wanted, but it was a result that felt like a positive step forward. And then this game, I don't know. I guess you can be of two minds because they get that first goal. They were dominant in the first half, and then they give up the equalizer to Costa. But they were never really in danger of I didn't really feel like they were in danger of losing this game. But then to pull it out at the end, it just maybe feels like, okay, maybe this is going back where we need it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think they were going to lose, but I was kind of like, man, not again.
Yes.
Like a game that you're playing at home,
Right.
and I think it would have been if they didn't win that last night, or if they didn't win on Wednesday night, that would have been the longest streak of not winning at home.
Correct. Yeah, it would have been their 5th game across all competitions without a win at home. That would have been the first time they'd ever done that. I would imagine it would have probably also been the 4th league game, first time they'd ever gone 4 league games in a row without winning. It had been 3 months since they won a home game.
Yeah. The last home game they won, I was there. And I don't live in Seattle. So that's just to kind of put that in perspective. And I don't even live in the state. So
anyway. Oh man, that was a game I got COVID. I forgot about that.
Yeah, you're welcome, I guess. I am maybe the reason why you got COVID, but I didn't get sick.
Somehow that feels unlikely, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, anyways, it kind of felt like, oh, here we go again. Like good enough isn't good enough type of thing.
Right. Yes.
Start feeling sorry for yourselves, but Cristian Roldan had other ideas, thank God. I would actually kind of say, like, for me personally, the vibes about like what this team is capable of and how they can actually play well actually started in the Colorado match, not the Nashville game. With the caveat that like Colorado, if it weren't for the dumpster fire that's happening in Toronto, would be probably like one of the worst teams in MLS history. But still, like you're going to Colorado on short rest. It is a bad place to play, facility wise, the elevation, short rest, kind of, all of that.
Yeah.
And they had like a coherent tactical game plan that had like player synergy, incredible attacking patterns, and it was just all there. It was just there, and it looked great. Sure, worst team in the league, whatever.
Right.
Definitely worst team in the West. But then to go to Nashville and things didn't like look great in that game. You could classify that game as boring, but everything in that match happened on the Sounders' terms, which doesn't happen when you play in Nashville. So, God dang. So it's just one of those things where it's like, you got to start feeling better about this team. Maybe nothing happens. Maybe they bounce in the first round. I don't know, but it's a different team than the team that we dealt with for the middle 70% of the season, let's say.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with you there that it's at the very least, one of the things Brian Schmetzer went on about last night was his insistence that this team never quits. And I think that's probably true. Like, as much as fans have oftentimes filled up my mentions saying things like this team has no heart, I have never really believed that. And I think last night was sort of a good example of what it like. I think sometimes the execution isn't there. And I think you can argue, we can go on and on about the reasons for that. But I do think the team has shown fight, for the most part. Maybe the Atlanta game was a notable exception, but they've not been out of games, similar to what, frankly, last year, they weren't really out of games last year either. It was just that they just didn't have the execution part of it. And, to this, on a, like, say what you will about things like expected goals, but all the underlying metrics have insisted that the Sounders are actually pretty good this year, even if the results haven't been there. And I think there's a metric that American Soccer Analysis keeps called expected points. And I think the Sounders are second or maybe fourth. I think they're fourth in expected points right now. But it's just the point being that this is a team that does a lot of things right. What they don't do really well right now is actually finish. And, maybe it's not that Cristian Roldan is a great finisher, but he does sort of provide an X factor for the Sounders that does seem to be pretty real. Their record when he plays is 7-1-6. That's almost a 2 points per game average. And when they don't play, they're averaging like 1.2 points per game. One of our readers actually put together a plot where they a plot graph, I think is what they're called, right? Is that right? And he basically put the plus minus for a player's XG and the plus minus for a player's actual goals on a graph. And based on that sort of metric, Cristian Roldan is arguably the most important player in the league in terms of the way that the team performs when he's on the field and off the field. And I think this was just another example of how important he is. It wasn't just that he scored the goal. I'll also note that his pressure, him and Alex's pressure, is what created the throw-in that led to the goal. And we see that sort of effort showing up in all sorts of little places. And I will say this, that if Cristian is available and fully fit, I don't see any reason why this team can't make a serious run at MLS Cup. And if he's not, they'll probably go in the first round.
Yeah. I mean, it's I hate being the type of guy, because, we always put a lot of thought into like the analytics or, like the narrative of a season. And, we're trying to offer insight to people. And it's just so funny that it's like it's Cristian Roldan. It just is. And, they're a good team when he plays, and they're not good when he doesn't play. And it is literally just that simple. And, uh, like litigate, I guess. I
Right.
don't know. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's the I'll say this for sure. The West is so wide open. We've said this so many times. Like, if the Sounders can just get into the playoffs, the West is so wide open that it feels like they could go on a run. And it should be said, the Sounders could still finish theoretically as low as 8th in the table. I think realistically their floor is probably 4th at this point. Like, I would be surprised if they drop below 4th, although it is theoretically possible. But if they win against Vancouver, they will literally be guaranteed a 4th, and they'll probably be in line for a 2nd or 3rd seed. Of course, there's also a very real possibility they're going to play the Timbers in the first round, which I don't know. I have sort of mixed feelings about. On one hand, I feel like it's a great opportunity to exercise some demons. I'm still not convinced that Portland is very good, as much as they have the Sounders number. And so I think there's a decent chance the Sounders would win a series against them. But frankly, like, there's not a lot of teams I am dying to play, and there's not a lot of teams I'm scared of playing in the first round or in the whole Western Conference.
I don't know. I'm pretty scared of playing Portland. I'll go ahead and just say that, because man, I don't want to deal with that.
I don't know if but are you scared, or are you just over the, like,
I'm scared
the meta narrative?
I'm scared of the Portland Timbers the same way I'm scared of the dishes in my sink.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I just don't want to face that reality.
Yeah, no, I feel you there. I definitely am on the same page.
And I know I just gave like a clip to like Timbers fans or whatever, but that's
right. Yeah, maybe that would be. Hey, if any Timbers fans want to clip that and like sort of promote the podcast, yeah. I'm willing to accept that as a fair trade. But like the Whitecaps are a pretty good matchup. I think we're going to learn a lot, I think, about this team on Saturday. If they handle the Whitecaps, the Whitecaps to me are pretty emblematic of the Western Conference right now. On their day, they look great, and there are still games where they look like absolute trash. And if the Sounders can, manage that game and actually look good, I would love, I would love to not care that much about what happens in the St. Louis game, And I feel like if the Sounders win on Saturday, they'll be on 52 points. And at that point, frankly, I'm willing to let it fall. If they beat it would be nice to have 55. Like there's a roundness to 55 points that I find very pleasing. And I think that would be a wonderful point total to end the season on. But I don't feel like 55. There's nothing magical about 55 points, right? Other than it's a 54%, other than it's claiming 54% of the available points.
And 55 burgers, 55 fries, 55 pizzas, 55.
Exactly. And that's an illusion. I'm teasing the second segment where we're going to talk about Jerry DiPoto's comments about the 54% winning percentage and what that and how that relates to the Sounders. So there's your teaser for the second segment. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel I realize it's a little convenient to do this, but I don't know. That win does make me feel a lot more comfortable with the state of affairs.
Yeah, and I will say, I was probably more pessimistic for most of the year than you were. Would you say a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like 2 weeks ago that you were telling me that this team was completely unwatchable.
Yes, I was doing that. I was definitely doing that after the Dallas game. And that was less than 2 weeks ago.
I think you said they were the worst team in MLS or something like that to me.
I said they're the easiest to play against.
Oh, there you go. That's what it was.
Which is a really important qualifier. And I don't know how to prove it.
Yeah.
But I was wrong. And it's great. I'm a new person here today to talk about how great they are. It really is I think people like me, and I don't want to speak for every fan that has had negative opinions because I don't want to be responsible for a lot of people in that camp.
Yeah.
So I'll just say people that were kind of worried for most of the season, which I was, and people who, they spend their time and their money watching this team.
Yeah.
They were bored and they were frustrated.
Fairly. I think totally fairly.
People like that, I'll just say, because I was one of those people, last night's game kicked off at 9:39 p.m. local time. That's very late for a Wednesday.
Yeah.
We wanted like a moment to hang our hats on. We needed something. And that's why I think I was so disappointed after the Portland game, because I wanted that to be the thing that I could be like, this is worthy of my investment of emotion and time and money. And it wasn't at that point. However, it's too late in the season to really know if this kind of galaxy moment, Cristian Roldan's goal, was that, but it can be if they do something special with it. And I remember I was on a show kind of after the Leagues Cup debacle. I think Aaron was hosting. And I just said, I want the team to give me something, because this is probably the last time that this group is together as its thing, And it just took a month later, and they kind of gave me that. Now I'm not gonna like be kind of irresponsible, but they could it could be more than just this, it could be more than just like a nice winner against the Galaxy and watch Greg Vanney look like he just saw a ghost, which rocks, by the way. I love seeing him look like a ghost at Lumen Field.
It happens a lot.
It sure does. It if I had a nickel for every time that happened, I'd have probably 6 nickels, which isn't a lot of nickels, but it sure is.
Sure is satisfying.
It is a interesting amount of nickels to have. Yeah, I mean, I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. I want to see this team do something. They probably won't. I don't know, but it would be cool.
I don't know. I would feel very reluctant. I'm very reluctant to make any bold predictions about where this is going to go. But I do feel like at the very least that if this is the last hurrah for this core group of players, that at least they're going to go down with some positive, it's not going to just be like backing into the playoffs, going out early, and it will be good night. Like, I mean, they could still go out early, but I at least think they gave us a reason to be optimistic. And given where this season was as recently as like a month ago, I have to consider that a little bit of a win. There was a lot of the things that we've been frustrated by all year that happened again last night. The Sounders took 18 shots. Way too few of those shots were dangerous. We saw Eber get into dangerous spots again and not really even come close to finishing. We saw, there was a lot there. We saw a good start foiled by a flat second half. There were you can go through the list of things that have been going wrong all year and were going wrong again last night. And yet they figured out a way to win. And that for some reason gives me hope that they can maybe put this together. And I don't even think they're going to start reeling off big wins over people. Like, I think that ship has probably sailed where we can, I'm definitely not going into the Whitecaps game thinking like, oh, we got a 3-0 win in our pocket. And that's going to it's probably going to be a grindy 2-1 win or something. Right. But I'll take it. And frankly, you can grind your way to MLS Cup, especially from the Western Conference. And if that's how this ends, great. And if it doesn't end that way, I guess I'm sort of at peace with that too.
Yeah. And I think what I meant when I was talking about this team was too easy to play against is when their thing didn't work, it just didn't work and nothing would come after that. The reason why I'm so encouraged after these last 2 games or 3 games now is when the one thing doesn't work, in which the one thing most of the season has been just Leo Chu dribbling really fast, getting to the byline, cutting it across towards the penalty area. Hopefully somebody's there. Hopefully somebody scores. That hasn't been working because, frankly, the last 2 games, Leo Chu hasn't been playing very well, but they've still looked good because they have other ideas. They can do different things with the ball. And yeah, they don't look incredibly dangerous, especially with just like taking a lot of shots outside of the box, which is like a thing I never like to see. But it is something, and it's like if there's this kind of confidence that exists with this team that didn't exist a few months ago, where it's like they get the ball in dangerous spots and they know they'll be back. They know in a couple of minutes, 30 seconds, whatever, they'll have another opportunity to create something. And when this team was at its worst, they would get into those areas and kind of tense up and then perform poorly in those spots because it's like, when am I going to get this opportunity again? They trust themselves that even down to the 96th minute from a throw in that was a poor back heel from the Galaxy, which happened twice, by the way, again, with the Nichols analogy. It's weird that happened twice. They will have an opportunity to score it. They might not, and Brian Smetzer was very sort of, he kind of was at like pains to say, like, I still don't think we've played really well. Right. And we don't always play very well, but we don't quit. So
yeah, no, I would agree with all that. I think that's a good way of sort of looking at it, that there is sort of a, I will say the other thing I've noticed in their wins, or at least in the games where they look good, is there are times when this team looks old and tired. And then there are a game like against Atlanta, they looked old and tired. I think that was probably a.
Yeah. And I think kind of what that comes down to is like, who's in the starting lineup? And the team looks old and tired when Nicholas Ladero and Raul Ruidiaz start, but they don't look old and tired when those 2 players don't start, be it either they're unavailable because they have a mysterious back injury, or it just kind of seems like the best 11 now for the Sounders doesn't involve Ladero in it. And that's true. They are, those 2 players are old and tired.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't, I guess the other thing I was going to, the other element of that is the alternate to the old and tired is they do a good job of counter pressing. They do a good job of winning second balls. And we saw that on both goals where, they essentially won second balls to keep the play alive. The first one was a perfect example of João Paulo just sort of like unwilling to give up on a play and winning a ball, winning probably 2 balls he didn't really have a lot of business winning. And then, having the class to put in a first-time cross to Morris, who had a really good header. I love that Jordan Morris scored on his first game back after giving his wife gave birth. And that's almost been a lost part of the narrative when there was many times that would have been like the entire story. But
his celebration was for Taylor Swift, right?
Right. But well, why don't we call this a segment? We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit about Megan Rapinoe's final game. We're going to talk about Jerry DiPoto's comments and how that relates to the Sounders. And we're going to tie it all together in a nice little bow. You're listening to No Study at This. Watson's Counter wants to thank everyone for their patience, but now the wait is over. Located at 6420 24th Avenue Northwest in Ballard, they've reopened in a brand new location with the same bomb-ass coffee and the same dumbass vibes. You can still expect their classics like the gochujang fried chicken sandwich and Fruity Pebbles French toast, alongside their new soft serve program and their world-class coffee. Make sure to follow them on Instagram for all the latest and greatest. Welcome back to Nos Arietes. So we have a few sort of off-topic things. We may as well start Megan Rapinoe's last game, or last regular season game with the Reign, or last regular season game period, I guess, is on Friday. Should be a record, hopefully a record crowd going to be there. They've already sold over 31,000 tickets. They need to get over 32,000 to set the NWSL record. Should be a pretty amazing atmosphere. If you don't have tickets, You can get them for as cheap as $15 sitting in GA. So I would try to be there. It's going to be a historic night. But I don't know. Do you have any Megan Rapinoe observations you want to share? It's been, I always think the thing I always love about Megan Rapinoe is the insistence on some people is that she's driving people away from soccer, when while she has ascended to levels of stardom that I don't know that any soccer player, certainly no woman soccer player has ever achieved. And the game is more popular now than it's ever been. And somehow we're to believe that she's holding the game back from being more popular.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of idiotic. It's just like the most bad faith argument that you could probably come up with.
Right. I don't like, I mean, it's like, I'll give you this analogy. You can hate, like, I don't think I'm going to be shocking anyone when I say I oppose basically everything that Donald Trump stands for, right? I will admit that more people have voted during the Trump era than ever before. Like, that's just an undeniable fact. And so you can't argue that Donald Trump drives people to not care about politics. For better or for worse, they care. They pay, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but and I guess in a similar way, Megan Rapinoe, you cannot say that Megan Rapinoe is making soccer unpopular. It's an insane thing to say.
Yeah. I will share just like one little, like, this is my like Megan Rapinoe tidbit that nobody else has, which I don't know how that's important or not.
No,
but
sure. That's good.
I very briefly worked for, back then it was called the Seattle Reign, and Megan Rapinoe was obviously a player on the team, worked for the team, and I was kind of tasked with like getting quotes and stuff after the game. And I just remember like having to pull this like superstar aside and being like, hey, can you answer like my silly questions? And not only did she like give me the time out of like obligation, but she was very, very like engaged with telling the story of this game that I'm pretty sure they lost. I think they lost 2-1 to the Washington Spirit, if I remember correctly. And she was just so like, I thought I was going to get 90 seconds, 3 questions, but we sat there for probably 15 minutes, and she kind of helped me like craft the narrative around everything she said. And she was just like really incredible, and she didn't have to do that, especially because we were standing outside of a 90-year-old locker room in Memorial Stadium or whatever it was, and it was dingy and wet, and it was gross, and it was dark, it was late, it was cold, very cold. And she was just like, she didn't know who I was. She probably doesn't know who I am still. And it's just kind of like, that just seems like who she is as a person, that it doesn't matter if it's, like ABC News or something doing a segment, or CNN or whatever, or just like team employee getting quotes. She like gives that time, gives that energy because she loves the sport and she loves people knowing about women's soccer, I think. So
yeah, I think that's a great observation. I guess on the other side of that coin, the one frustration I have during the sort of the Megan Rapinoe era, which is literally the entirety of the Reign's existence, is that somehow she's just not more synonymous with the Reign. Like, to me, this is a player who spent effectively 10 years playing in Seattle, and way too many sports fans don't realize that Megan Rapinoe, probably the world's most famous soccer player, plays soccer here. And I don't think that's Rapinoe's fault. I think that's a failure of the Reign to sort of maximize their, marketing dollars. And I suppose on some level that was a conscientious choice that they didn't want to force Megan into doing more press than she did. And a lot of people wanted her attention, and so I'm not necessarily trying to blame anyone for this. I just think it's too bad that we're having to wait until literally her last game to see a crowd that she's probably deserved for most of her career to be out here. There's going to be 32,000, 33,000 people probably out at Lumen Field. It's going to be an electric atmosphere. they had a pretty good crowd last or 2 years ago when they had the doubleheader. But that should have really been. I can't help but feel like that should have been the norm, or it should have been closer to the norm. And so it's just kind of too bad that we had this great window of 10 years where Rapinoe was here, where the Reign were really competitive, and for whatever reason, the Reign have not been able to get to the mainstream of Seattle sports consciousness. And I guess I'm just kind of bummed about that, but also hopeful that we can send her off in style.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of time to kind of do the introspection as like Seattle sports fans, and then also like hopefully, the team gets more popular. But yeah, I mean, as a player, there aren't men or women in Seattle sports have not accomplished anything close to Megan Rapinoe. Besides maybe her partner.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely amazing player. At her best was, absolutely must watch. And it's, I feel very lucky that we were able to have her here, and it's funny to think that at one point she was playing for Sounders women on an amateur team with, a star-studded amateur team, which was kind of a funny little footnote to all this. But the other kind of broad Seattle story I wanted to talk about was these comments that Jerry Dipoto, the Mariners GM, made about how Mariners fans should be happy that the team's goal is to win 54% of the games every year, because that sort of maximizes the potential for eventually winning a World Series. I didn't quite follow the logic there, but I can only imagine, the thing that struck me about that so much is the way, like, I think there's some truth in what he said, but the way he delivered it was so amazingly tone deaf. I can't even imagine the Sounders trying to get away with telling fans like, look, we make the playoffs every year, and that should be enough.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Mariners fan. You are not. You are like broadly a Seattle sports fan, I think.
Sure.
Right? Like you want
to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think you got like a little caught up in the playoff run last year and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you're like anti-Mariners, but the thing about this is I've just been thinking about like, what would this do in the Sounders context if everything's equal, right? Like, let's imagine Craig Weibel or Adrian Hanauer or even Brian Smetzer comes out and just like, hey, we fell short, but think of all the good times.
Right.
Which to some varying degree, the Sounders have had to come out and say stuff like that in the past. The Sounders have been to 9 finals where they could win trophies, and they've won 7 of them. That is above 54%. But even then, if you kind of look at their regular season play, they've been about at 54%, more or less, like for the sake of conversation. They've qualified for the playoffs every year but one. The one year they didn't qualify for the playoffs, they won a trophy no other MLS team has ever won or ever will, because now it's a different trophy. And it's just like, it is a decent and good base of expectation that Sounders fans have built up for 15 years. And it's great. Other fan bases make fun of us because we're spoiled, but that's sport. That is that's the point. Like, you're supposed to win or try to win. You're supposed to try to win. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're Minnesota sports and you fail in like really spectacular ways when you're supposed to win. But to come out and say, especially to Mariners fans, that 54% is like good and you should be thankful because we're running a sustainable business and we have a good stadium, is like total crap, because the Mariners did win 55% of their games for a decade and didn't even sniff a World Series in that time. So it's just like sports fans are not stupid. Like, everybody wants to say sports fans are stupid because they like watching men run around in different colored pajamas and kick, hit, or grab a ball. They're not stupid. They understand that sports is a business. You don't like they get it. They get that like businesses that aren't owned by like mega billionaires have to be sustainable, but don't tell them to their face that they're so ungrateful for the experiences the Mariners have given us over the last 8 years, because that's when Jerry was hired as president or GM or what. Like he's had like 8 different positions or whatever, but it's like you can't say that that's the ceiling. You gotta provide fans more than that. And I think the Sounders are the antithesis to the Mariners, and they just play across the street. It's where expectation is not only met but exceeded, and that raises the expectation year over year. And there's no reason why the Mariners cannot be the baseball version of the Sounders. The Sounders are a sustainable business. They don't own a TV channel or the stadium they play in. The Mariners have that benefit. I think it's actually owned by the city, but whatever.
They control the stadium.
Yeah, that's way too specific of an argument to try to get into right now. The Mariners have every opportunity to be the baseball version of the Sounders, but they're too stupid and too arrogant to be able to do it, because they think just being fine is fine, and it isn't. It just isn't. They're the only team in Major League Baseball that has not gone to a World Series. How is that okay? Like,
that's a wild stat.
it's insane. When you start getting into this stuff, it will drive you crazy. It will drive you absolutely crazy. And it has driven people crazy, and that's why they're not Mariners fans anymore. And I don't blame them. Because look, like, you can't just say, oh, like the only way to win isn't, you can't, there's not only one way to win in Major League Baseball. There isn't, but you don't do any of them. So what's the point? What are you trying? Like, spend a little bit of money, try and see what happens. And I think the reason why I think this is important to talk about on a Sounders podcast is because not only does this team play across the street, they play roughly the same time of year as the Mariners, but we have an ownership group and employees of the team that get the Sounders, and they get the culture, and they get the fans, and I hope to never take that for granted. And I think what's really important, and I'll shut up right after this point, is we went 1 year without making the playoffs. Something incredible happened in that year, but the worst thing to ever happen to the team also happened in that year, where they didn't make the playoffs. And a lot of people wanted roster churn, or maybe a new head coach, or we ended up getting a new GM anyways. Like, they wanted change, but because the organization and the club and the fans and every part of it, the Brian Spencer always says the club is a connection between the players and the fans. Because of that culture, we're able to respond 1 year later and cruise into the playoffs and have a chance to do something, even though, we just spent 45 minutes or whatever talking about how it might not happen. So with that said, you just got to try. And the Sounders try so hard, and it's so refreshing to have that. And I hope we never get rid of like that special connection where the team is connected with the fans in such a way where everybody is moving in the same direction.
Yeah, well, I think you said it well. I think that's probably a good place to call this a show. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been good to hear you and to have you on. Thank you to our sponsors, Watson's Counter and Full Pool Wines, as well as our subscribers. If you don't know, you can become a subscriber to Sounder at Heart for as little as $19 a year. In addition to these shows, we also do a mini podcast at least once or twice a week called Sound Bites. That's available only to subscribers. We also do a mailbag episode that's only available to subscribers. We haven't done one of those for a little bit, but we'll be doing one again soon. And so with all that said, thank you for listening. I'm Jeremiah Shan, signing off for No Sadietes. And remember, you will never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.